everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am here to talk about my top 10 favorite books that I read in 2021. Just a little bit of a disclaimer here. This is going to be my top 10 books that are not adult romance. I am making 4 separate videos for my top favorite books of the year. So this one is top 10 books. I'm also doing top 10 contemporary and paranormal romances, top 10 historical romances, and top 10 romance novellas. So there is just a lot of content coming this month. I did do a ranking of these books, so I have number 10 to number 1, just like with the other favorites videos that I am releasing. I'm not sure what order I want to release these videos in, but you'll see them when you see them. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this. I will say I really agonized over this ranking. I know it's really not all that serious, but I take my reading very seriously. So it did take me a while to decide on like the particular ranking, but I do truly love all 10 of these books pretty equally. I mean, there's definitely a difference between like my number 10 book and my number 1 book, but yeah, I mean, these are all fantastic books, and of course I highly recommend all of them. So without further ado, let us get into this. For number 10, we have a book that really surprised me this year. There's actually quite a few books on this list that surprised me this year. That is Perfect on Paper by Sophie Gonzalez. So this is a YA contemporary romance, though the romance isn't the most prevalent thing about this book. There's just a lot going on. There's also a bit of a love triangle happening as well. We have our main character, Darcy. This definitely gives me vibes of the show Sex Education. She is an anonymous relationship counselor for her classmates at her elite private school. Basically, people send in letters to this particular locker. She reads them and sends back an email response to her classmates anonymously. She also has a huge crush on her best friend, Brooke, pictured here. Then this guy, Broem, steps into the picture because he wants to hire Darcy as his own personal relationship coach. He doesn't want to just send her a letter. Like, he needs her full services, basically. And so because she thinks that he is blackmailing her, she agrees to do it, and things go on from there. This book just hits so many marks for me. One, Darcy is bisexual, and the way that bisexuality and queerness and being queer enough is discussed in this book is just amazing, because there is a queer club at Darcy's school that she is a part of, and there's just really great discussions brought up during those scenes. I also really enjoyed the romance between her and Broem. He is Australian, so he's got that Australian accent going on. We love that. Things get really messy and dramatic in this book, but that's what I love about YA contemporaries. That's why I read them. I also loved the way that Darcy talks about relationships in this book. We see that she really has done her research, and she's actually very knowledgeable about relationships. Like, she follows a lot of experts on YouTube and things like that. And it's because of this book that I found out about attachment styles, which it's kind of like your love language, but it specifically has to do with like how you attach to others. And so I took a quiz and I found out that I am a fearful avoidant. There are 4 different types of attachment styles, and that was just so interesting to learn about. So yeah, like, I just can't recommend this highly enough. Like I said, this was a surprise. I really had no idea going into it that I was going to love it as much as I did. Next up, we have another incredible YA contemporary romance. This is Happily Ever Afters by Elise Bryant. This is another book that completely took me by surprise this year. I had no idea that this book was a thing until after it came out. It did come out in 2021, and I randomly saw Jess from Peace Love Books reading and recommending this. This gives vibes of To All the Boys I've Loved Before and all of the black girl magic you could ever want. So this is about Tessa, our main character. She's 16 years old. She loves to write romance novels. And she gets into this elite arts high school, and she realizes once she starts classes there that she has a really bad case of writer's block. And so her best friend suggests that she get inspiration from real life to inspire her writing. And so she pursues this guy, I think his name is Nico. Yes, he's the brooding artist who looks like he walked out of one of Tessa's story. And so she decides to pursue him. Meanwhile, she meets this guy, Sam, who lives across the street from her, and he is the sweetest, of cinnamon roll soft boys. Oh my God, I fell in love with him throughout reading this book. So there's definitely a love triangle situation. This is another book that turns quite messy. I love Tessa, our main character, so much. Parts of this book I wanted to just shake her, and parts of this book I wanted to hug her. And it's just a really great coming of age story. I also really loved her family. They were really great side characters to have, and I cannot wait to read more from Elise Bryant. So for number 8 on this list, we have the only nonfiction book that I am featuring in this video. This is literally one of the best memoirs that I have ever read. This is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. I hate to introduce this amazing woman in this way, but this is the easiest way to convey what this book is about. So Chanel was known as Emily Doe. She was the woman that Brock Turner assaulted. So this memoir is not only about all of that and the trial and, you know, going through that terrible experience, but also just her life in general. The way that this book describes things such as rape culture, pain, resilience, healing, life in general, it's just like stunningly written. It is amazing. And I really had no clue what I was getting into when I started this book. I mean, this is the story of a survivor. And I really don't know what else to say about this book except that I cannot recommend it highly enough. I feel like I don't have the words to eloquently discuss this book, but it's just incredible and you need to read it. For number 7, we have a book that completely blew me away this year. I really had no idea how truly epic this book was going to be, and I'm just so glad that I read it this year. That is The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schreffer. First of all, we need to appreciate this cover together. I think it's just absolutely incredible. This is a YA science fiction book that, in my opinion, was completely mismarketed, and that is why it has not found its audience yet. This was marketed as a YA space romance. And while there's nothing wrong with YA space romances, this is so much more than a romance novel. So the basic premise is that we have Kodiak and Ambrose. They are 2 astronauts that are representing 2 of the only surviving countries left on Earth. We have the Federation and Democratia. So this starts in the year 2470. And essentially Ambrose's older sister was sent on a solo mission out into space. And they lost track of her ship. They really don't know if she died or not. But what's absolutely insane is that 2 years after this incident, the distress beacon in his sister's spaceship was manually triggered. And so now Ambrose and Kodiak have been sent out to rescue her. This book feels like you're reading a space thriller. It goes to so many places that you could never predict, both literally and figuratively. And there is a really great romance between Ambrose and Kodiak. It ends up being like a pretty epic romance throughout the course of this book. There are so many plot twists and turns. It is unreal. It is absolutely unreal. I will never shut up about this book because I just feel like not nearly enough people know about this or have read it. So now we are on to number 6. This is the first of a couple of books that I'm mentioning from the same author. Sorry if that's annoying to any of you, but just like, let me live my life. Okay, so for number 6, we have Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. Wow, how do I even start this off? So this is an adult fantasy novel that is definitely inspired by A Christmas Carol. We have our main character, Wallace. He is a terrible person. At the very beginning of the book, we are introduced to just how terrible he is. He's definitely kind of an Ebenezer Scrooge. He ends up having a heart attack and dying, like right at the beginning of the book. Then Wallace is watching his funeral, and this woman who is known as a Reaper shows up, and her job is to take him to this mysterious tea shop where there is this man, Hugo, who is known as a ferryman, and his job is to help Wallace make the transition from life to the afterlife. So this book is so many things. Like I said, it is a fantasy novel. It discusses life and death in such a unique way. I did like the longest Goodreads review ever for this book because there are so many nuances to this book. There are so many different subjects brought up. There's a lot of pain, but there's also a lot of happiness in this book. Like, I laughed out loud quite a few times and I cried. And there's also this really sweet and wholesome romance between Wallace and Hugo. It is absolutely everything, and I love all the different characters that we're introduced to. I will say this is not the most like fast-paced book, and most of this book takes place in this mysterious tea shop. So just know that going in, this is more of a quiet book. And I also left this book feeling not as afraid of death as I was before reading this. Like, this book truly changed my mindset in a lot of ways. So I just can't recommend this highly enough. I think it's just a beautiful story. And I mean, really any kind of reimagining of A Christmas Carol I am going to fall for. And I just loved the way that TJ Klune wrote this story. All right, we have made it to my top 5 books of 2021. This was really hard for me to rank because I truly loved all 5 of these books pretty darn equally. So for number 5, I decided to go with The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. Oh my god. Wow. This is book 2 in the Poppy War trilogy. This is an adult fantasy series that has some interesting historical context. It is partially based off of 2 wars that had to do with China. One of the wars that's being covered in this is the Opium Wars, which took place in the late 1800s, and I think that had to do with the UK and China, and then also the Sino-Japanese War, which happened between 1937 and 1945, which is essentially what was happening in China during World War II. So this centers around our main character, Rin, one of the best morally gray characters that has ever been written, in my opinion. Oh my lord. She is just such an awesome character. So we have Rin. She lives in this very poor village in a country that is very reminiscent of ancient China. And then another country that is heavily featured is Mugen, which is definitely inspired by Japan. So there is this military academy that she desperately wants to go to, and so she studies really hard and she gets in, and things go on from there. There's a lot of fantastical elements involving gods in this series. It's so freaking cool. But this book 2 in particular, oh boy, talk about a roller coaster. I truly didn't know where this book was going as I was reading it. This is a very war-centered series, as you could tell from my setup of this plot. And so what is going on in the war in this second book in particular, like, was just straight up bonkers and crazy. And like, anytime I felt like we were settling into some kind of routine, shit would go down and everything would be upended, and it was just absolutely insane. Literally every character in this is morally gray. What I adore about this series is how realistic it is of a fantasy series. I could tell that the author's goal here was to display just how messy war is and how there is no good guys and bad guys. War is war, and it's very messy, and there's not necessarily like a clean-cut way to start or end a war. Like, things just are crazy. I don't know. I also would highly recommend this if you're someone that is trying to bridge the gap between reading YA fantasy and adult fantasy. I think that this is pretty accessible for mainly YA readers, and it's incredible. I can't recommend it highly enough. For number 4, we have one of the best thrillers that I have ever read in my life. This is The Passengers by John Mars. This takes place in present day in 2019, but in an alternate reality where in the UK at least, driverless cars have taken over the roadways. So we're essentially following like 6 to 7 pretty major characters, and they all start their day out pretty normally, and they all get into separate driverless cars for whatever reason. Then a voice comes over the speaker of all of these cars and tells the passengers that they are headed to the destination that this hacker has decided. And in 2.5 hours, they will all get to the same destination and they will crash into each other, killing all of them. And things just go on from there. John Mars is the king of plot twists. Literally every chapter ends in a crazy plot twist that you could never predict. And talk about a book that kept me on the edge of my seat. My goodness, like, I could not stop reading this. It's just so well written, so well done. I cannot wait to read more from this author because, wow, this book just truly blew me away. All right, here we are with my top 3 books of 2021. I would love it if you would pause this video actually and leave a comment down below of what you think my top 3 books of the year were. So, number 3. This one came pretty late in the year. I read it this past month and wow. Wow. This is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. Oh, I am so glad that I finally read this book this year. It is everything that I ever could have hoped for from the premise. It is truly an epic YA science fiction novel, and this is just book 1 in a series. Wow. So, this is following our main character, Spensa. She wants to be a fighter pilot because her dad was one. And there's a lot of controversy surrounding her father. So there was this battle where he apparently defected, fled the enemy, and so his own flight team shot him down. So he is now dead, and now Spensa's family is in disgrace. So this is such an interesting world. Spensa lives on this planet that everybody has to live underground because there is just like all of this debris in this planet's atmosphere. So there's a lot of like debris showers like almost constantly. Not only that, but there are these aliens known as the Krell that are constantly invading and attacking them. And so everybody just has to live underground. And then there is this one massive Air Force base that is on the surface of the planet. This book feels like you are watching a space thriller movie. It is so cinematic in writing style. It's so exciting. The pacing's immaculate. You cannot get bored while reading this book, even though there's definitely some downtime. Of course, there's battle scenes where everybody is in their own spacecraft zooming around fighting the Krell, but then there's also other scenes that are much more quiet, but it's just paced so well. The characters are so dynamic, so interesting. Spensa is a fantastic main character to follow. She goes through so much in this first book alone. The ending blew my mind. Blew my mind. Like, I kind of guessed the direction of like where the plot twist was going, but part of it I could never have guessed in a million years. Like, so incredible. I cannot recommend, clearly I can't recommend this highly enough if it's my 3rd favorite book that I read this year. This is also making me really curious about other books that Brandon Sanderson has written, even though I think primarily he writes adult fantasy and this is definitely YA science fiction, but wow, like the writing is incredible and I can't wait to read the rest of this series. So for my number 2 favorite book that I read in 2021, you may be able to guess because there is a certain author that I love and adore that I have not mentioned yet, but that is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. Oh my God. So this is book 5 in the Court of Thorns and Roses series. Yes, you could argue that this is fairy smut. Especially this book in particular gets very, very steamy. And you wouldn't be wrong about that. However, Sarah J. Maas, I personally think that this book is her in her writing peak. In this particular installment, we are centering around Nesta, who is the sister of Feyre, who was the main character in the first 4 books of this series. And it's just crazy how Sarah J. Maas redeemed Nesta for the reader. Like, I kind of hated Nesta in those first 3 books or whatever. Like, I kind of despised her, and for very good reason. And then the second I'm put into her point of view, I totally understand her. I related to her so much. The journey that Nesta goes through in this massive book, it's like almost 800 pages. It's beautiful, it's stunning. There's also an incredible romance with her and Cassian. It's everything that I ever could have hoped for from Nesta and Cassian's story. I really like the direction that Sarah J. Maas is now taking this series in, because definitely that first trilogy, you know, had a very clear ending, but the direction that she is taking the world and the characters in this installment is just really interesting, and I can't wait to see where this series goes. It's just... it's so good. It is so, so good. I am Sarah J. Maas trash and I don't even care. All right, everybody, we made it to my number 1 favorite book of 2021. Now, this is technically 2 books that are taking up this slot. However, they are 2 books in the same series and I truly love both of these books equally. So that is The Extraordinary series by TJ Klune. Yes, I am talking about TJ Klune again. I don't care, fight me. But this is book 1, The Extraordinaries, and Flashfire is book 2. This came out in 2021. I'll just hold up The Extraordinaries, book 1. So this is everything that you could ever want from a gay superhero YA book. I feel like that sums it up, basically. We have our main character, Nick. He lives in a world where extraordinaries or superheroes exist. And he has a crush on this one superhero or one extraordinary named Shadowstar in particular. He writes fan fiction, like self-insert fan fiction where he's in a relationship with Shadowstar. And so basically one day he meets Shadowstar and he decides that he wants to become an extraordinary. Basically in this world, like there's just not a ton of research about how one becomes an extraordinary. Like, are they born with it? Maybe it's Maybelline. What am I saying? You know, so he really thinks that he could just make himself be one. And this is so freaking amazing. It's like the perfect vibe for a gay superhero story. Like, it's so campy, it's so funny. I laughed out loud numerous times, but there's also a lot of heart to the story. There's also a friends to lovers romance with his best friend Seth, pictured here, and it's like the most adorable thing ever. Also, Nick's dad, who is a cop, is like the most iconic dad ever. He's so freaking funny. And in Flashfire, the second book, I feel like this was just everything that I ever could have wanted for a sequel to this first book. And I feel like this book also addressed some issues that some readers had with this first book, and I really appreciated that. And also in this sequel, we meet new characters, including an extraordinary who is a drag queen named Miss Conduct, and her power is electricity. Iconic. So I will never, ever, ever shut up about these books. Not nearly enough of you have read them. Oh my God, like so good. I cannot wait for the third and final book, which is coming out in July. I'm definitely gonna reread these 2 books before jumping into that final book. Ugh. It is just so freaking amazing. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for my top 10 favorite books of 2021. I hope that you enjoyed. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to tell me about your top favorite books from 2021. And I would also love it if you would leave a like and subscribe. And I thank you so much in advance if you do. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.